All right, guys. Well, welcome to the first SoundTraxx webinar. Now, just a couple of things. This is going to be our first in the series. We'll be trying to post these at the worst case about once a month. So be sure, if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, make sure you subscribe to that at customernews@soundtraxx.com. If you're one of our retail partners, make sure that you are getting the newsletter. So first off, not everybody knows me. My name is George Bogatuk III. I am the SoundTraxx sales and support representative. My primary function is working with our retail partners, as well as attending many shows and clinics and hosting stuff like that outside of the building, try to help familiarize users, modelers with our product. I have been a model railroader since I was a little kid and have always enjoyed it, and operation and realistic modeling has always been kind of one of my interests and the thing that drives me about the passion of the hobby. And with the Tsunami2, we're able to really show off that operation, and we're going to kind of touch on some of that today. So today's agenda, first off, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go over very quickly what is the Tsunami2. We're going to kind of overview the Tsunami2 features, and we're going to demonstrate some of the operation and show off some of the features while we're talking, and then we'll do a simulated operation at the end. And then at the very end of our presentation, we'll answer some questions for you. So first off, we want to start with our first poll. And our first poll today is, how familiar are you with the Tsunami2 Steam decoder? So if you can go ahead and just kind of click that button, let us know, and then we'll share the results here in a little bit. First of all, we're going to kind of talk about what is Tsunami2. Tsunami2 is our premium digital sound decoder line. We want to make sure this is the choice for serious model railroaders. We wanted to include prototypical accuracy and realism, as well as including features of operation in the decoder, so that you as the operator or your customers as the operator can enjoy running their railroads more like the actual thing. We've put all of the features that we can work with in the decoder. At the time, we've had and have current and former railroaders on staff. So when we're building the Tsunami2, we had their experiences to draw from to build it into the decoder to make sure that we could have a realistic experience for the user and the modeler. One of the biggest things is there's no download time necessary. We have a really, really large memory chip that's on the decoder, so we're able to cram all of the sounds for the file into one decoder. And so what this does is it limits decoders that your retailer will have on the shelf, and you can have one decoder and it will have all the selections on there. For example, our Steam, and we'll get into it today, has all of their sounds on there. You purchase Steam and it will have all the selections in there. You just simply make a few CV choices. Now with this Tsunami2 product line, we've improved the board format and we've improved the hardware in such a way that we're allowing smaller hardware design so that you can fit it into much smaller products. For example, our TSU 1100 is small enough to be able to fit into an N-scale narrowhead diesel. Conversely, our TSU 4400 is good for S, O, and larger scales. And this is designed with the hardware so that you can have all the features, and it doesn't generate anywhere near the heat that the previous generation did. And that's where the more efficient design. And so your decoder boards are less susceptible for power losses during the operation. Now, the most common board that we see is the TSU PNP, and this is a diesel board replacement. And if you look closely, you'll see a lot of holes through that circuit board. And this is basically condensed all of the different mounting provisions for all the different brands all in one decoder. So Atlas, Athearn, Bowser, Intermountain, Kato, and others all use those provisions. And so therefore, we've been able to condense that into one part number. Now, one of the other things we've done is we've built on a strong lineage. We have taken our original Tsunami decoders, which were the industry leading, and we have improved a lot of the features that we've had in that decoder, as well as added many more features to help enhance, again, the operation. We've got our best quality sounds on the market, and we're very proud of this. We actually build right here in the USA. And if you look at the pictures down there, you'll actually see some of our surface mount technology equipment that we use to assemble. And the one at the far left there is actually a picture of one of the things we're most proud of. It's actually a flying probe test that helps us ensure that you're getting a working decoder the first time out of the package. There's several different tours that you can see of our factory downstairs. One of them just posted yesterday from our friend James Wright, where we walked him through the production floor. So take a look at that and enjoy it. And like I said, we're very proud that we manufacture here. We've also made many improvements over all the features that you know and love. A lot of these improvements incorporate customer feedback. Some of it, again, as we mentioned, we had the railroaders on staff that we've had feedback from them on how to improve the features so that it works more prototypically. And we also have people like myself who've never run a railroad so that we can make sure that the features that we were trying to implement aren't too complicated or too difficult to use during normal operation. Now, one of the other things here is we have interactive features and sounds. And what that means is that the sounds are not just being played randomly in the background. All of the sounds are interactive and they work together based on how you're using your locomotive. And this is how we've improved it, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. Now, with this chart, you'll be able to compare what the original Tsunami could do versus the Tsunami2. And there is a lot of features that we have improved upon, and there is a lot of things that have actually been able to be translated over from the original to the Tsunami2. Now, some of the core features that we've talked about, this first one here I really want to hit home is 16 independent sound channels. And what that means is that the decoder itself has 16 different avenues to play different sounds all at the same time. Our nearest competitor boasts with an exclamation point that they have 8. And what this means is that when the decoder is playing sounds, when a sound is triggered by operation, you're not going to have one of the other sounds turn off as the decoder has to prioritize another sound. And one of our competitors' decoders will actually turn off the sound of the air compressor when you turn on the bell, for example. And with 16 independent sound channels, we're able to fully embrace all of the sounds that the locomotive can make, the real locomotive, and we're able to reproduce that. And it's done in an intelligent way to make sure that we're not going to sacrifice some of the major sounds that you would hear of a locomotive sitting there or running to play a whistle or a bell, for example. Now, some of these other features, the reactive dynamic digital exhaust, we're going to talk about that a little bit today during our presentation. But what we've done is we've been able to expand the DDE from the original Tsunami. It was only applicable to the steam, but now we've been able to incorporate it across the entire product line. Hyperdrive motor, or Hyperdrive 2 motor control. This is a more advanced motor control feature, and we have definitely listened, and we've got a lot better motor control built into the Tsunami2. Improved hyperlight functions and hyperlight effects. We've added some more different hyperlight effects and different controls so that you can more realistically make your locomotive look just like the real thing. Our flex map function mapping allows you to take any function and assign it to any button, as well as trigger automatic light and sound effects based on operation. And then we've included a louder, more powerful audio amplifier with a full sound studio in each decoder. With the 7-band equalizer, a lot of people really love that in the original Tsunami, and so that's in the Tsunami2 as well. But we've also got our industry-first high-pass filter, a fully adjustable reverb that includes a short reverb all the way up to a heavy echo, and an alternate volume mixer, which allows you to have a second set of volume control, say for home versus club settings. Now, with this, most of these topics have been covered in our YouTube series called On Board with SoundTraxx that you can visit at youtube.com/SoundTraxx videos, or you can go to soundtraxx.com at the bottom of the page and click the YouTube icon there, and it'll take you right to our page. We've been posting video content every week to help ensure that we get the information out and kind of show you how to use and operate the decoder. So let's share the results of our poll really quickly. Let's kind of see. So it looks like we've got a lot of familiarity, but we don't know everything about it. So that's really good to hear. There are a lot of features in there, so I didn't expect that to be as high as it was. So thanks guys for looking and playing with it and reading with it. We're going to cover some topics and kind of some high points here during the presentation today. And like I said, we'll be doing these monthly, so we'll be able to go into a little bit more depth. So now we're going to kind of overview the Steam. Now, with our Steam-2 decoder, and this is the second generation of our Tsunami2 Steam, we have added 28 whistles to bring the roster to a industry-leading 90 different whistle choices. Now, the whistle choices give you long and short blasts of the whistle, and the reason we've included both of those is to give you the ability to reproduce whistle signals based on what the locomotive is going to do. The engineer would communicate with long and short blasts of the whistle to tell everybody what was about to happen. For example, moving forward would be 2 long blasts of the whistle, moving reverse would be 3 short blasts, and stopped would be 1 short blast. And everybody's familiar, of course, with the grade crossing, which is 2 longs, a short, and a long. So we're going to go ahead and kind of demonstrate some of these. So this is whistle number 87. This is a Rio Grande 8-inch single chime. So there's the long and short blast. So to change the whistle, I can simply select CV120 and give it a different value. Now on our website under the manuals page, you're going to see the Tsunami2 Steam 2 sound selection reference, and that's going to give you the full roster of the 90 whistles that you have to choose from. So let's try a couple here really quickly. Let's check the Crosby 5-inch flat top 3 chime, which is whistle number 10. We'll try one more, and we'll pick a L&N passenger 3 chime. This is whistle number 34. So by simply making a CV adjustment, you can kind of see how we've been able to make this one decoder choice, and you can simply make the adjustments to match. Now, in the days of Steam, a lot of the engineers carried their own whistles, and so you're free to pick a little bit of a whistle that you like, or a whistle that matches your prototype. It just depends. But whistles weren't as standardized as diesels are today. Now, another thing that we've added in is 10 exhaust chuffs. So you've got 10 different exhaust chuffs built into the decoder, and this will also change the blower sounds to match. So again, we're going to go back to our locomotive here. We're going to move forward here, about speed step 6, 7. And I can simply make a CV adjustment, so CV 123, and I have no idea what's in there, so let's pick, and hope it's different. Let's pick exhaust chuff number 2, so it'll be a light choice number 3. So you can kind of hear how that exhaust changed on the fly. Now, along those lines, we've also included 10 air compressor choices. There are 9 air compressors and a vacuum pump sound in there. This includes single phase, cross compound, single and dual air compressors, and then, of course, as I mentioned, the vacuum pump. There's 8 different steam dynamos. And the dynamo is a steam-driven electrical generator that powers up the lights on the locomotive. And you've got 8 to choose from, single, dual, triple dynamos. And then there's different bells. And the bells, there's 12 different bells that you can choose from, but there's different ring rates for each of them. And so there's different recordings. And so when you go to your sound selection, you're going to see that you actually have 54 different choices in bells. So here's, I believe this one is the heavy brass. So let's take this. We'll take our CV 122. We'll set it to a value of 1. So now you can hear that swing back of the bell as it's coming back. Well, now I can take that same bell, and I'm going to set it to a value of 4, which will be the fast air rung bell. And you can kind of hear how it's instantly changed. And so with that, it gives you 54 different choices of bells, because this may be the same bell, but it's recorded at different ring rates. So next up, we've got the ability to select between a manual and a power reverse. And so when you're changing directions, you can have the ka-thunk of a Johnson bar, or you can hear the steam-assisted power reverse. As locomotives got bigger, they had to have the power reverse to help move the linkage because it became very heavy and very big. You can also select the type of fuel that's being used. So you can have a coal-burning locomotive that's hand-shoveled or auger-fed. You can hear an oil-burning locomotive or a wood-fuel locomotive. We're going to hear the safety pop off. And this is one of the over 50 different sound effects that will play. I'm going to go ahead and mute that. Also, we've added in a new 3-cylinder exhaust cadence, so you'll get that chuff, 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 chuff as a 3-cylinder locomotive. As always, you've been able to set an articulated locomotive, and you can hear that sound of the front and rear drivers going in and out of sync. And let me play that really quick for you here. So we're going to move the locomotive forward here at about speed step 7 again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to an articulated locomotive while it's running. So I'm going to change CV 112, in this case, to a value of 171. And you can kind of hear how that exhaust chuff cadence has changed, and you're hearing the sets of drivers go out of sync with each other. So one of the other things that we've done with the Tsunami2 is we've actually redesigned the chuff playback. And what that means is the chuff sound may be a, let's say, a 3/4 second or a 1 second recording to hear the entire exhaust chuff. Well, as you get going faster in speed, the ability to play the entire chuff sound becomes less and less viable, where, you know, keeping in time 4 chuffs per revolution as your locomotive is moving, you may only get half a second in between chuffs. And so what happens is the decoder would cut off the chuff sound so that it would keep in time and play the next chuff. And with the original Tsunami and other sound decoders that are out there, you'll get kind of what's called a helicoptering, or I've heard the term machine gun sound effect. And what we've done is we've redesigned the chuff playback so that now you get a more accurate, more realistic experience. And this has been improved in the high speed, of course, and of course with the articulated. So just to give you a really quick, let you hear it moving at about speed step 30 here. And so you can kind of hear how you're getting a smoother, more realistic transition into at a high speed. And then once you reach the speed that you're intending, your locomotive engineer can back off the throttle and just maintain speed. So we'll go ahead and bring him to a stop. And then now we're actually going to try another poll here. So the next poll is, we've talked about all the different sound selections that we've talked about, 90 different whistles, 10 exhaust chuffs, 10 air compressors, 8 steam dynamos, the type of fuel that's selected, articulated selected, and so forth. How many different sound combination profiles can we build with the Tsunami2? And we'll revisit that here in just a second. So one of the other things that we've built in with the Tsunami2 is we've improved the motor control, but as a result, we were also able to control the dynamic digital exhaust, or the DDE, the dynamic digital exhaust. And what this does, the dynamic exhaust, what it's doing is it's watching the load on the motor and watching what you're doing with the locomotive, and will adjust the exhaust chuff tone to sound like what you're doing. So as you increase the throttle, you'll hear that chuff accelerate a little louder. And same thing when you're coasting to a stop, you'll hear that chuff back off. But also the DDE is actively watching the load and will determine how hard to make the chuff as it's running. So go ahead and run the locomotive here really quickly. Let's unmute it. We'll get them moving at about speed step 10. So you can kind of hear how that chuff has kind of backed off a little bit now that we've gotten to speed. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reach over and put a little bit of resistance on the wheels to simulate a load on the motor. And you can kind of hear how that chuff kicks in and out to simulate what the work the locomotive is doing. So as you're encountering a grade, you're actually going to hear the locomotive work a little harder. And with the dynamic digital exhaust, there is a short calibration process that you can go through that will allow the decoder to fine-tune the operation of that motor and the locomotive itself, so that way you will get a more realistic and more true-to-life experience. Now, some of the other things that we've improved with it is the sounds of the rod clank, and we've also included a new sound of the leaky valve packing as your locomotive is moving Now with this, we've also got our dynamic digital exhaust, but you can manually adjust the cutoff as well. So I'm going to move this locomotive here forward at about speed step 5. And by using the DDE, you'll hear a change in tone. But if I want to override that, I can use the F5 and the F6 key. And you'll hear the change in tone of the exhaust chuff. And this is simulating the engineer moving the Johnson bar to adjust the valve timing so that he can monitor and maximize the amount of steam that's being injected into the cylinders. And then the 4th press of the F5 will actually trigger into drifting mode. And now you'll hear that new rod clank and the leaky valve packing, as you can hear as we're drifting down grade. Now we'll use the 6 key to re-engage our chuff so we can re-engage. And you're kind of hearing how that chuff is changing. So now we're back into full exhaust control, and we'll go ahead and bring it to a stop. So with this, we're able to manually override the DDE, and so this gives you the most realistic experience of a downhill drifting of any decoder that's out there. So we're going to go ahead and share the results of our poll now. So a lot of you are confident that we're seeing 1.8 million different choices in there, but the actual truth is with the steam decoder, with all the different whistles that we've added, exhaust chuffs, and articulated cadence includes with and without wheel slip, as the sound of the drivers going in and out of sync, we actually can do 2.1 billion different sound profile combinations. Now, in that number, I did not include volume settings, reverb settings, or adjusting any of that. This is just simply sound selection for how the decoder plays the sound as the locomotive is running. So we can build that 2.1 billion different sound profiles. So again, thanks for participating with that. Now, next up, we're going to talk about the operation. The Tsunami2 actually has functioning brakes. Now, the original Tsunami had the F11 brakes where you would apply the F11 sound and you would hear the brake squeal as it brings the locomotive to a stop. With the Tsunami2, we've actually improved the realistic operation because we've included now the independent operation of the brakes, which is, as its name implies, the brakes on the locomotive. So when you take the F11 and you turn it on and you hear the squeal, that's the sound of the independent brake being on the locomotive. Now, when you release it, you're actually going to hear the air bail off. Now, with the Tsunami2, we've actually included the sounds of the automatic brake. And the automatic brake are the sounds of the brakes on the train. The engineer will pump up the train line and maintain a pressure throughout the train line. And when the brakes are set, he actually reduces the pressure in that airline. And the brakes on the cars are actually automatically set at this point, which will then drag the locomotive and train to a stop. So let's quickly hear both of these. So first, we're going to go ahead and start moving at about speed step 10. So now I'm going to apply the independent brake. And you're going to see the locomotive come to a stop. And at this point, I can even change directions, release the brakes. And you'll hear the locomotive run. We'll bring it to a stop. Now you can feather this too. You can release the brakes on and off until you get to stop where you want it to stop. Now with our locomotive, we're going to say we're tied onto our train. We're going to press the F12 key. And what you're actually going to hear is you're going to hear the automatic brake system engage, and you're going to hear the compressor start to cycle as it charges the train line. So now as the compressor is running, go ahead and release the brakes, get it going. And now we're going to apply the brakes. And now you're going to hear a different sound, but you're also going to notice that the locomotive takes a little longer to slow down. So you can set the brakes and the braking rate independent of each other. So you can set the independent brake rate and you can set the automatic. Now, other sounds we've got is the cylinder cocks. This is used by the F4. You can trigger this on and off manually, or you can set it up to be automatically controlled based on operation. Now, one of the things we can do that with our decoder that you can't is if the fireman accidentally oversaturates the dry pipe and gets water in there, if he fills the boiler too high and gets water into the dry pipe, what will happen is then he has to open the cylinder cocks to blow out that water. So you can do that while it's running. Again, it's a simple press of the F4. Some of the other sounds that we've added in, we've kind of heard some of them today, including the safety valve pop-off, but Fireman Fred has some new features and new tasks that he's going to perform, in addition to some operation that you can trigger, including the injector. Frame check, you'll hear some of these sounds as they're running around in the background. And then one of the other things I wanted to mention is there's a new wheel slip feature. So when we're operating, we can trigger the F9 sound to make the wheels break loose or sound of the driver slipping on the wheels. Now, we actually thought about causing the motor to have a little bit extra power and break the wheels loose off the rails, but we remembered things like traction tires, and so we decided that probably wasn't necessarily a good idea. So really quickly, I'll let you hear it. We'll release our brakes. So you hear the wheels break loose, and you hear the engineer back the throttle off and then re-engage the throttle. So we'll do it again. And then we'll bring it to a stop. So next up, we want to take a quick look at the function assignments. This is included with your Tsunami2 decoder, and it'll kind of go over all the different controls that you have to use the 28 different functions. We've talked about a lot of these. We've talked about the long and short whistle, the cylinder cocks, your Johnson bar cutoff, and that's the manual adjustment. Grade crossing sequence, you can trigger automatically, or you can do it manually with the F2 and the F3. The brakes, F11 is the brake application. F12 is our brake select and also our train line charge. So when F12 is off, we're using the independent brakes. When F12 is on, we're using the automatic brakes. And some of the other sounds there, water stop, fuel loading, F19 is our wheel slip, and so forth. So now really quickly, let's kind of show how all of this works and set up an actual operation demo. So first off, we're going to do a real quick walkthrough of what we're going to do, and then we're going to show it. So first, when we're on our locomotive, we've got our train assigned to us. We're going to turn on our headlight with F0 as the dynamo. We're going to blow our whistle signal, so we're going to move in the forward direction. So that's going to be 2 long blasts of the whistle. We're going to make sure our Johnson bar is in the forward direction. We're going to turn on our bell before we move. Again, a warning to everybody around that we're about to move. We're going to open the sander valve because this will help give us traction on the rails. So the F21. We're going to open the cylinder cocks, and that'll help blow out any condensated water out of the cylinders to make sure that we don't blow off the cylinder head. And then we're going to open the throttle, and we're going to pull out the coupler slack. So we can just go to speed step 1 or speed step 2, just slightly pull out. We're going to release the independent brake or the train brake, depending on which one we're using. And this will allow our locomotive now to start moving. And then we can adjust our cutoff if we need to. Now that we've got traction, we can close our sander valve, close the cylinder cocks, and then open the throttle to get moving. So let's go ahead and do that really quickly with our locomotive. So we're going to turn on our headlight with F0, and you're going to see the dynamo spool up, and you're going to see the light spool up with it. And that's one of the features of our hyperlights called the dyno light. Now we're going to blow our whistle signal, so 2 long blasts. Okay, we're going to make sure we're in the forward direction. Now we're going to turn on our bell. Open the sander valve. And open the cylinder cocks. And we're going to start to move. Now we've got our slack out of the coupler. You can turn off the bell, close the sander valve, and we'll close the cylinder cocks up. And then we can go ahead and start to move. And the first thing we're going to encounter is a grade crossing. So we're going to do our grade crossing sequence. So we're going to press F9. And we're on the way. So you can kind of see how adding in a little bit of sound and using prototypical practices can really make your operation a little bit more involved and a lot more enjoyable. So to bring the locomotive to a stop, we've got to tell our crew we're getting ready to make a stop. So we're going to blow our whistle signal. We're going to go ahead and set our brakes. And you're going to hear and see the locomotive come to a stop. We're stopped, so we got to blow our last whistle signal. Now the crew can get off and service the engine as needed. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of the presentation as we have prepared. Guys, thanks for watching and participating. I hope this gave you guys the information that you wanted. We're going to go ahead and open up the forum for questions, and I'm going to invite Mackenzie here to read a question, and we'll try to answer those as we can.
Can the wheel slip feature be set for automation?
The question is, can the wheel slip feature be set for automation? You can enable any sound effect to become automatic based on moving forward, reversed, moving, stopped and forward, and stopped and reversed. So the automatic sound would only happen when you first start to move the locomotive. So other than that, there's not like a timer after, say, 20 seconds or so, it'll automatically do it. So unfortunately, at this point, there is not, but it's a good suggestion. We'll keep it in mind and pass it on to the engineers.
Can you go over using a smoke generator with the Tsunami2?
So a smoke generator with the Tsunami2, basically the outputs for the Tsunami2 are limited to 100 milliamps, and most smoke generators are going to draw more than 100 milliamps. So what you're going to have to do is basically trigger a relay to then send power to a smoke unit. So if you turn on a function, you can then power a smoke unit by a relay that will then take track power and apply it to the smoke unit. So give us a call or an email, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that because it depends on how you want to operate it. And like I said, on short term, that's kind of the way to do it. I will say that the larger scale, the TSU 4400 actually has a little bit more of a threshold for the function output, so you don't necessarily need a relay with the larger TSU 4400 decoder.
As an installer, it would be awesome to buy a decoder that could be steam or diesel in one decoder. You mentioned that there is plenty of memory space on the decoder. Is there any chance you will be working towards that and it would become a reality?
Well, we've actually really condensed our product line with the Tsunami2. We've taken, for example, on our diesel decoders, we take all the EMDs and we put it into one decoder. And then the original Tsunami had different board formats. So you had the TSU IM1000, the TSU GN1000, the AT1000, the BW1000, and so forth. And what we did is we condensed the hardware into a single decoder, and then we condensed all the EMD files onto the one. And that pretty much maxes out the sound files for diesel on one decoder is 9 different diesel prime movers. So the ability to do one decoder with everything on it is very rare. It's not going to be as easy as it sounds because you've got fully different operating software as well, because the steam locomotive doesn't work the same way a diesel locomotive works. And then you have to add the sound files on top of that. So at least, I mean, at the very least, we've got steam and then diesel, and the diesel versions are broken up by EMD, GE, Alco, and then the lovingly referred to as the Land of Misfit Toys is the Baldwin and others, and that kind of has all of the others onto it. So, but we're going to get into that a little bit more in the next webinar with the diesel versions. But the steam, we have done that where all the steam is in one decoder. So all these choices are actually in the decoder.
Have the speaker requirements changed with the Tsunami2?
Yeah, the speaker requirements have changed with the Tsunami2. With the louder audio amplifier, one of the things is that you also need to kind of have a cognizant choice of which speaker you're using and what the power rating is. The TSU 1100 is still a 1-watt amplifier, but the TSU 2200, the 21P NEM, and the PNP boards are all 2-watt amplifiers, and the TSU 4400, the 4-amp decoder, is actually a 3-watt amplifier. So you want to make sure that you have a speaker or speakers that can help dissipate that. So if you're using a TSU PNP, for example, and you want to use the mini cube speakers, which are rated at 0.7 of a watt, you can actually take 2 speakers and put them in series so that you get 1.4 watts of power, so you're within tolerances of that 2-watt amplifier. So yes, you will need to make sure that you have speakers that are accurately rated.
Can you go back to the product comparison slide? How much smaller is the Tsunami 2 versus the Tsunami?
This comparison slide, we can go back to it if you need to, but the document is actually on our website at SoundTraxx.com. But the size comparison is not necessarily listed on there. But the smaller decoder, the TSU 750, was an inch long by about a 1/2 inch wide, and the new hardware allows us to make this decoder a little smaller. So it's an inch long, but now it's basically about 3/8 of an inch wide, and gives us a little bit more flexibility in that regard. The original TSU 1000 is the same width as the TSU 2200, but with the newer hardware, it doesn't need the heat sink anymore. So the decoder itself is physically smaller. It's a little thin. It's a lot thinner. It's the same width because we're still using that same 9-pin connector, but it is shorter in length because the hardware is much more efficient and more intelligently drawn out. So I would refer you to the website, SoundTraxx.com, under the products, and it'll give you size dimensions of all the different board formats.
Is there a reference database available that would tell us which bell, whistle, etc. to use for any particular prototype locomotive, i.e. cab forward, base boy, etc.?
There really isn't right now. We've done a few, but not very many. Part of the reason is, as we mentioned, there's so many different possible sound combinations and so many different choices. For example, let's look at a USRA heavy mountain, for example. There could be 5 railroads that use the exact same one because it was a USRA design, but each of them had a different whistle, and so I would have to create 5 different profiles. So in the short term, no, there's nothing like that right now. So what I would encourage you to do is maybe do a couple of minutes worth of research, look it up, see if you can find what sounds are available and what they sound like. I've done this many times on some of my own locomotives where I'll listen to a amateur YouTube video, and amateur is the key word because if it's a professional production, you get sound dubbed in, and listen to those sounds and kind of go through the roster and just listen to it one by one and find one that's close or matches. You're not going to break the decoder by changing CVs. So listen to each of them and pick one that sounds like you would expect it to or sounds like a prototype recording that you've got. Doing a comprehensive list like that would become a monumental task. So at the short term, no, I don't have anything.
Okay. For future versions, could the DDE sense actual wheel slip and activate the sound function? Well,
interesting you say that. One of the things I did forget to mention is the exhaust chuff on the Tsunami 2 is actually watching the rotations of the motor, and it's keeping the chuff in time. So if you were to actually break the wheels loose, your chuff will do the exact same thing. So really quickly here, I'll kind of show you. I'm going to take the momentum away from this locomotive for a second. Okay, so let's try this again. So if we're moving at speed step 4, let's say, and I want to break the wheels loose, I can just goose the throttle really quickly, and I can simulate that without momentum. But to get back to the point, to one of your questions, it senses the wheels, the rotation. So when you set the chuff rate, the decoder is no longer watching simply just the commanded speed step, but what it's actually doing is it's watching the rotations of the motor to make sure that your chuff is in time. And so therefore a cam is no longer necessary. But the point is, if your wheels actually break loose, yes, you will hear that sound.
Will you have an RDC sound available?
RDC is on our wish list, and it is something that we're working on getting scheduled. Unfortunately, we've had some conflicts over the summer that we haven't been able to make it happen, but it is there are active conversations going on right now for a recording. So short term, I don't have anything that's coming out next week or tomorrow or whatever, but as soon as we can make this recording trip happen, we'll get these recordings and get them in there. In the meantime, if you actually go and listen to, I think it's the Caterpillar diesel engine, it's a very close cousin to the RDC diesel engine. So if you adjust with the equalizer a little bit, you can simulate the RDC pretty close.
The coupler slack, when a train starts, a series of coupler bangs is heard. Is this perhaps a future feature, or is that possible now?
It's something that we kind of talked about, but then the question becomes how far and how long. And the other side of this is a lot of the sounds that we've looked at over the time is what is the sounds the locomotive's making. And for example, where I go with this is there's some companies out there that have a sound system that, you know, that boast that they have 28 functions, but some of those sounds are chicken noises or city sounds and stuff like that. And while that's neat and it's kind of a cool effect, but it's also coming out of your locomotive. And so we focused on the sounds that are actually going to be coming out of the locomotive. So if you're halfway through the train down the line and you're hearing the coupler slack coming out of the locomotive, it's not necessarily as realistic of an experience. So I will say it's something that we thought about, and we have ideas on how to address that, but at the short term, I don't have a full solution to that.
I've got an old German steam engine. I want to put a Tsunami 2 in. Will the 3-pole armature work okay with the Tsunami 2?
3-pole armature should work just fine. The decoder you can calibrate to the motor itself, and it'll watch itself. So you'll have to fiddle with the CVs a little bit, but I see no reason why you'd have a problem.
And back to that coupler one, perhaps in the sound card decoder.
Now I don't want to show all my cards. So for the moment, we'll say it's in our ideas. When will the Tsunami 2 have volume control available on the controller? Oh, on the controller. Volume settings isn't something you do a lot. Usually when you're operating, you're running your train, you're not necessarily fiddling with the volume. You have the immediate mute button that you can turn on and off. But as I mentioned in the core features there, we talked about an alternate volume mixer where you can go in and set all the volumes for all the sound effects at different volume levels. Defaulted right now, they're at about half. And then by activating a function which is currently unassigned, you can, or I should say unassigned out of the package, you can assign it to an unused function or move it around and assign it to somewhere else. But you can hit a function button and it will cut the volumes into half. It's a setting in the CV, and if you go to the user's guide, it will walk you through the process on how to do that. So I think we're pretty much to the end, guys. I do want to thank you for spending your time with us. I know we've gone a little longer than what we initially anticipated, but I do want to thank you guys for coming, spending some time with us. If you have any further questions, be sure to send us your questions at support@soundtraxx.com. Couple of things to finish up. These webinars, we'll be doing these. We're going to try to do them about once a month. We're going to be having some of our retail partners will have some of those that are going to be specific for you guys, as well as some that are going to be just operation and user enjoyable. And then we'll also get into some of the nuts and bolts on CV programming. What is DCC and how does it work? Because there's a lot of myths out there on how DCC works. So these are all scheduled and planned. So be sure to subscribe to our newsletter if you're not already, and you'll get information and updates on when these are going to be posted and when we're going to be doing these. Also, if you're one of our retail partners and you have not been getting the newsletter, please make sure we know that so that we can make sure that you're on the newsletter list. For example, I believe we sent one out last week. So if for any reason you didn't get that, be sure to check, let us know. And also watch or read those and watch the videos. We're putting a lot of time into it to help share the information with you guys so that you can share it with your customers. So guys, again, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And make sure you go visit your retailers this weekend and purchase some Tsunami 2s.